Most writers hate talking about Steve. Stick to the end of the video to find out why. I like this idea in this question of piecing things together, which is different than brainstorming. That is exactly how I do it. And when I look at the other authors that I'm studying for this little video, they do it too. They use different words, but really what they're doing is piecing it together. And so I feel like that term is universal in a way that brainstorming is. R.L. Stine literally does this with outlining. Says that there are times where he's written 3 or 4 outlines and he calls his editor and says, I feel like I've written the book, I've written so many outlines. He's doing, piecing it together in his outlining stage. Margaret Atwood and Judy Blume, and they piece it together as they go, looking at their journals and their notes and their research and whatever it is that they have next to them. David Lynch, I'm not even going to touch that. And Stephen King has absolutely no intention of telling us, so let's not even guess. The way I do it is very similar to Neil Gaiman, who, like Atwood and Judy Blume, has his compost heap and his ideas where he focuses on that and brings it all together, but then he takes it a step further and he pushes the envelope a little bit. How is that different? He questions things, and that is definitely something I like to do. How much of Steve ends up in your final product? And I would say that ghost story I'm writing, a lot of it, but then I always also find things along the way, and Judy Blume finds things along the way. Most pantsers do, and a lot of the people on this list are pantsers. So I think a pantser finds the things along the way and they'll go back and change things. Margaret Atwood, and I've identified her as a plantster. Blind Assassin, she started it from the wrong character 3 or 4 times and had to restart it. Alias Grace, she started it in the 3rd person and had to rewrite it in the 1st. So she kind of like Tolkien did. So if you know anything about the way Tolkien wrote, and this was definitely when I only pantsed and didn't do any prep. I wrote like this all the time, and I would write, and then I'd get stuck, and I'd start all over again, and it was like waves on the shore. When I tried to plot last year, I got stuck, mostly because I got bored. Someone like R.L. Stine, who outlines everything, once he sits down to write, pretty much the outline ends up in the book because he's spent all that time outlining. I would like to thank M. Bennett Romance Writer for tagging us for this video. If you are a writer or author, consider yourself tagged. Make sure to tag me so I can watch your video too. How do you know what to keep or toss? So Stephen King, what he will tell us about his process is that he doesn't keep a notebook. Because a notebook's a great way to keep bad ideas. He knows he's going to keep it when the idea sticks with him in his head. Whereas on the flip side, David Lynch says that you absolutely want to write everything down. You write everything down. He says he has lost 2 great ideas in his life. And the fact that he knows that, I think, is really remarkable. But because he didn't write it down, and I hate that feeling. I really don't agree with David Lynch. I think I agree with Judy Blume. She writes it down in her journal to get it out, and it may never get in the book, but she has to get it out, and that is what I need to do. If I need to come back to it, I can look it up, and I like journals that are specific to the book I'm writing. I used to just write it down in the nearest journal, and I have a writing journal as I went, and I didn't index it. And if you want to know how I save my journals, check out this video here. I have told no one about Steve, but I carry him on my keychain. Stephen King famously threw out Carrie, and his wife pulled Carrie out of the bin and said, you have to finish this book. He's very tight-lipped about his process. I would say that Stephen King likely knows to share his work with his wife. R.L. Stine swears by sharing it with his editor. He says, if you do not have an editor to share your story with, find somebody. Margaret Atwood says, yes, once you've reached the place where I can't do anything more on this, that's when you share it. That's when you share it under experts, and she suggests not editors. So unlike R.L. Stine, who's like, an editor is a great resource, you share it with the people that are going to read it, and specifically the experts. When she wrote Oryx and Crake, obviously she's not a young 20-something man with commitment issues, so she gave it to somebody who fell into that category. He said it's what the fuck, not what in the fuck. And second, that's not how you roll a joint. And then she said, yeah, but how was the story? How did it go? And he said, how did you know? But Margaret Atwood and Neil Gaiman, at their heart, are comic book writers. And the films based on their stories definitely impacted me. David Lynch, obviously a filmmaker, and probably my biggest influence is David Lynch. He's just absolutely stunning. And my access to Stephen King before I started reading his work was television. The reason I read The Colorado Kid was because of Haven. So I'm gonna go on the record and say these are my inspirations. Who inspired them? Tolkien is one that Stephen King mentions all the time. R.L. Stine, inspired by the Tales of the Crypt. Margaret Atwood cites inspirations as George Orwell, Huxley. David Lynch is famous for being inspired by Billy Wilder, specifically Sunset Boulevard. And Neil Gaiman actually says that Lou Reed is one of his greatest. Now back to my friend Steve. Steve is an idea, or at least he represents one in this video. Continuity issues. I've been completely consistent in this entire video, so that's all you, mate. Doppelgangers are so Lynchian that doppelgangers can push us to write better. They can make us feel like we're doing amazing. You have been writing for any length of time. You have done this where you have written a story and then somebody comes out with something that is similar. So what? Do you know how much David Lynch stuff has been copied over the years? I mean, I would say that it's probably safe to say that nobody did anything like Twin Peaks first. He was the first. And Riverdale, basically all of series television ever, anything that's not episodic, anything that blends genres. He's been credited for things like The Sopranos, for everything that followed The Sopranos, for Breaking Bad. Directors have basically named everything as their inspiration. And he is called the father of series television, in that the modern television that we, binge-worthy television that we have today, is in existence. Desperate Housewives, episodic format. And not only did he do that, but he also meshed genres, which hadn't really been done before. Everything. So he had a crime, everything. Fantasy in mainstream. Fantasy at prime time. What? You've seen me do this a lot in my sprints and my write with me's. This series of 10 is the best way. You just write down 10 things. And if you do that, then you're gonna get rid of all the cliches, all the things you've seen before, and you're gonna find something new or something old in a new way. Fairy tale retellings are hugely popular. And the reason they're hugely popular is we all know these stories, but we'll see them in a different way. Steve didn't come to me in a dream. Steve came to me in a different way. Stick to the end, I'll tell you about where Steve came from. I wouldn't negate an idea from a dream. In fact, I've written a lot of stories that started off in a dream. Not single one of them came around to fruition. David Lynch and dreams, I mean, Love of Dreams is famous. My first novel was incomplete. It was called The Tightrope Walker. The first novel I completely wrote was a novella called A Story, which had 3 parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. I thought this was meta when I was in high school. R.L. Stine's first book was actually a joke book. Stephen King's first book, Carrie. Judy Blume's first book, Tales of 4th Grade, Nothing. Margaret Atwood's first book, The Edible Woman. Interesting point. Did you know that she has an unpublished first book that was seen by editors, but they wanted her to rewrite the ending, which had a woman push her husband off a building, and they felt that this should be changed. She wouldn't change it, and then she didn't get that book published, and to this day, it hasn't been published. David Lynch's first film was actually a moving painting which got him a grant to do more moving paintings, which is how he paid for his first full-length feature, Eraserhead. Neil Gaiman's first book was actually a biography of Duran Duran. Me, at the time of writing this, I was finishing off the ghost story in preparation for NaNoWriMo coming up in just a couple weeks, where I will be writing my romance, non-romance. Stephen King's newest book at the time of producing this video is Fairy Tale. Margaret Atwood's Old Babes in the Wood came out recently. There's obviously a new season of The Handmaid's Tale coming out. There's a free short story novella type thing available at Amazon that's in the Handmaid's Tale universe, My Evil Mother. The Sandman dropped just a couple of months ago. They actually dropped a bonus, kind of like an annual to the series. The Nancy Boys are getting a TV series. Why do all these authors hate Steve? That's because authors most frequently are asked, where do you get your ideas from? Don't ask authors, but you asked me, so I'll tell you. And I'll tell you where they get theirs. First of all, Stephen King has no idea. And if he did know, he wouldn't tell you. I mentioned this in writing like Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood seems to get her ideas from just immersion, from putting herself into situations. And Judy Blume from observing the world, and this is definitely how I do it, but I take it to the next level with what Neil Gaiman does, which is two ideas and put them together, like my ghost story, which is a ghost story and it's a comedy. R.L. Stine ideas from the Idea Store. Check out this video here. And Steve, my buddy Steve, I picked him up on the pavement, not from the Idea Store.